Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn massive amounts of complicated source material into sharp, clear conversational knowledge.
Today, we are taking on a massive figure, maybe the world's most famous living dissident artist, Ai Weiwei.
That's almost an understatement, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
When you look at the collected sources, I mean, the biographies, the documentation of all his controversies, the catalogs of his art, you realize you're not just looking at an artist.
No.
You're looking at a political timeline. A timeline expressed through sculpture, through performance, through architecture.
And that's our mission for you today. We're going to try and really understand the scale of his impact and the intense, continuous conflict that has defined his entire career. We've synthesized this huge stack of documentation into a single narrative.
And we have to jump right into the core tension, because Ai Weiwei is fundamentally a paradox.
How so?
Well, to the outside world, he's a global brand. He's this internationally recognized architect and artist. He was the artistic consultant for the iconic Beijing National Stadium.
The bird's nest,
Right?
for the 2008 Olympics.
Exactly. A symbol of China's global arrival, designed with his expertise.
But, and this is the paradox, his entire public career since then, especially since that stadium opened, has been this deliberate, often really perilous and always very public confrontation with the exact same Chinese government that commissioned his work.
He chose radical individualism over state patronage every single time.
Yeah, his life is just a continuous argument with authority. But I think to really grasp why he operates this way, we can't start with the artist.
No, you have to start with the son of the exile.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's trace this right from the beginning, because his political life wasn't a choice he made as an adult. It was, in a very real sense, inherited.
It was. Ai Weiwei is the son of the renowned Chinese poet Ai Qing.
And that lineage is everything.
It's the whole story. Ai Qing was one of China's most celebrated poets, but he was denounced during the 1957 anti-rightist movement. And that denunciation wasn't just, a political setback. It was an existential blow.
And it immediately determined the course of his young son's life.
Oh, completely. The sources are really clear on this. In 1958, and you have to remember, Ai Weiwei is barely a year old at this point.
Just a baby.
Exactly, just a baby. And his whole family is exiled. They're sent to a labor camp in a place called Baidawang in Heilongjiang province.
And then a few years later, in 1961, they were moved even farther away.
Right, to Xinjiang province.
Yeah.
In the remote northwest. Think about the conditions. They lived under this extreme duress for 16 years.
16 years.
All the way up to 1976. So this wasn't some brief period of hardship. This was his entire childhood, his adolescence, spent in physical and political isolation, always under the shadow of his father being an enemy of the state.
It's a childhood that you can see informs his entire worldview. He didn't have to read about political oppression in a book.
He lived it.
He lived it. And he reflected on this, saying the exile was the whirlpool that swallowed up my father, upended my life too, leaving a mark on me that I carry to this day.
That phrase, a mark on me, that feeling of being marked, of carrying this burden of state persecution, that's the psychological engine for all the defiance that comes later.
That's a really crucial distinction. When he criticizes authority later on, it's not some abstract performance art.
No, it's rooted in the memory of his family just trying to survive in those labor camps. So after the Cultural Revolution finally ends, the family is allowed to return to Beijing, and he starts his formal studies as an artist in 1978.
He enrolls in the Beijing Film Academy, studying animation.
And almost immediately, he's involved in Dissent again. This time, it's artistic dissent. He co-founds this early avant-garde art group called the Stars.
And what were they about?
They were just pushing back, pushing against the very rigid, state-approved artistic norms of the time. They were experimenting with more expressive, individualistic styles. They were a small group, but they were pioneers.
The Stars group, even though they disbanded pretty quickly in '83, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
It gave him his first taste of organizing, of asserting a kind of counter-narrative through art.
Right. But the next stage for him was about finding his own aesthetic language, and he had to go global for that. So in 1981, he's part of the very first generation of students allowed to study abroad after the reforms in the 80s.
And he goes to the United States, to New York City, where he stays until 1993.
And his New York years are this classic story. It's the immigrant hustle meeting an artistic awakening.
Right. He didn't just glide into a fancy art school. He studied English at UPenn and Berkeley. He dropped out of Parsons.
He made a living drawing street portraits, taking odd jobs. The sources mention he was also at the Art Students League of New York for a few years, just soaking it all in.
So his practical education was in survival.
Yes, but his artistic education was purely conceptual. He was just absorbing the entire East Village art scene. And that exposed him directly to these seminal figures who were redefining what art could even be. Marcel Duchamp,
The master of the ready-made.
Andy Warhol, with his obsession with celebrity and mass production, Jasper Johns.
And it was here, through seeing their work, that he started his own conceptual practice using these ready-made objects.
Taking everyday things, mundane items, and just recontextualizing them to challenge our assumptions about value and meaning. This practice, which he learns in the U.S., becomes the absolute basis for so many of his famous pieces later on in China.
It's like the perfect training for a political artist.
It is. Conceptual art is all about intellectual commentary, not just making something beautiful. But then you get these biographical details that are just, they're incredible. Like his connection with the beat poet Allen Ginsberg.
The story of how they met is fantastic.
Isn't it? Ginsberg reads some poetry about China at an event. And it turns out he'd actually traveled to China years before and met Ai Weiwei's father, Ai Qing.
It's this profound, almost predestined connection. The son of the persecuted Chinese poet meeting the radical American poet who actually knew his father. It's like it links the literary descent of the East and the West.
And there's even more to his time in the East Village that tells you so much about his character. While he was tirelessly documenting his surroundings, and that resulted in this huge collection called the New York Photographs, he was also known for a very, very different discipline.
Gambling.
The gambling. The sources are so specific, they call him a top-tier professional blackjack player.
Frequently visiting Atlantic City casinos, when you hear that, it just stops you. A major conceptual artist who is also a professional gambler.
It sounds like a total contradiction, but if you look closer, it speaks to a very specific set of skills. Skills that become absolutely crucial for the dissident he's about to become.
How so?
Well, blackjack isn't just luck. It requires intense mental discipline, focus, pattern recognition, and, above all, a willingness to take highly calculated risks against a very powerful house. The casino.
That's a fascinating connection. You're saying the discipline needed to beat the casino is the same discipline you need to calculate the risks of confronting an authoritarian state.
I think so, absolutely. It's about being cool-headed, recognizing the statistical likelihood of failure, and still choosing to place that big bet.
So he returns to China in 1993 because his father is ill. And he's carrying this new conceptual vocabulary and this risk assessment mentality.
And back in Beijing, he doesn't rejoin the establishment. Yeah. Not at all. He helps establish the experimental artist's Beijing East Village and immediately gets back to pushing boundaries. He co-publishes these highly experimental, controversial art books like the black cover book and the white cover book.
And this leads him to architecture.
It does. In 1999, he moves to this fringe area called Kaohsiungdi, and he designs and builds his own studio house. It's his very first architectural project.
A simple, angular, modern statement.
And its success prompts him to found his own architecture studio, Fake Design, in 2003.
And that studio is what leads directly to the monumental project that put him on the global map for anyone outside the art world.
The Beijing National Stadium, the Bird's Nest, for the 2008 Summer Olympics.
He was brought on as the artistic consultant, collaborating with the famous Swiss firm Herzog and de Meuron.
And his initial motivation, as he said it, was simple and purely artistic. He just loved design. The stadium was, structurally and aesthetically groundbreaking, an icon of modern architecture.
But once that stadium became a political symbol, the centerpiece of the government's big celebration, his relationship with it just shattered.
He didn't just distance himself. He explicitly and publicly rejected the project entirely.
He went on a major campaign of rejection, didn't he?
He did. He refused to be photographed with it. He said he had already forgotten about it. I mean, that's a huge statement from a primary collaborator.
The sources quote him calling the stadium part of a pretend smile of bad taste. He felt the government was misusing the architecture for pure propaganda.
And he refused to be associated with that political messaging, even though it was arguably the biggest architectural commission of his life.
He even lashed out at others involved, saying they shamelessly abused their profession.
Right, for failing to make a moral judgment about the event's political context. So the stadium, which he helped create to be a symbol of Chinese modernity, became his first major act of dissidence against state co-optation. It really set the stage for everything that followed.
Okay, so let's move into part 2 then. This is the shift from being a critical artist to becoming a full-blown digital dissident and investigative activist. He takes that moral stand on the bird's nest, and then he escalates it. drastically using the internet.
And this transformation really kicks off in 2005. AI was invited to start a blog on Sina Weibo,
Which was China's biggest internet platform at the time.
a massive platform. And he saw it as an opportunity, and he immediately utilized it as a weapon.
For 4 intense years, the sources describe it as a steady stream of scathing social commentary, criticism of government policy, thoughts on art and architecture, and autobiographical writings. It was just relentless.
It was personal, and it was profoundly political. He was blurring the line between his artistic practice and his public life in a way that, very few other global figures were doing at that time.
And the art world noticed this immediately.
They did. Dale Eisinger of Complex magazine made this incredibly bold claim, ranking AI's blogging as the 4th greatest work of performance art ever.
The 4th greatest ever. What was the argument?
The argument was that he used the most prevalent mass medium of our time, the web, to create something full and tangible, rather than just a symbolic representation of his critique. His life, online, was the art.
Of course, that kind of prolific, high-profile criticism could never survive on a censored platform.
No. His Sina blog was shut down on May 28, 2009. But he just migrated. He became a prolific user of Twitter, writing almost exclusively in Chinese. Sources suggest he was spending at least 8 hours a day online.
Just mastering these global platforms to completely bypass domestic censorship.
And his mastery of those platforms meant that when the key confrontation arrived, he had all the tools he needed to turn it into an organized political movement.
And that confrontation was the devastating Sichuan earthquake in 2008.
A catastrophic event, an 8.0 magnitude earthquake on May 12th. But the tragedy was compounded by the corruption it laid bare.
Over 5,000 student casualties. Largely because the school buildings just collapsed instantly.
The infamous tofu-dreg schools, built with substandard materials. And this failure of state infrastructure, combined with what the government did next, was the ultimate catalyst for Ai Weiwei.
The government flatly refused to release the names or even the total count of the students who died. They were just trying to bury the evidence of the corrupted construction.
And Ai Weiwei decided this could not stand. So he recruited volunteers online and launched what he called the Citizens Investigation to compile the names and details of the student victims themselves.
This was dangerous, painstaking work that the state explicitly did not want anyone doing.
His mission statement, which he posted on his blog right before it got shut down, just captures the moral urgency of it all. To remember the departed, to show concern for life, to take responsibility. We are initiating a citizens' investigation. We will seek out the names of each departed child, and we will remember them.
The logistical effort involved in that kind of digital age investigation must have been immense.
It was. These volunteers were on the ground. They were risking harassment, meticulously cross-referencing information, trying to give names back to these faceless statistics.
And the results were shocking.
By April 2009, the list had 5,385 names on it. This was the data the government refused to acknowledge. He published this exhaustive documentation on his blog. He even turned it into an audio work.
Remembrance.
Right, where people online recorded themselves reciting the names of over 5,000 students over and over again to ensure the cover-up could not be silent.
And this is where the cost of that activism became physical and immediate.
Yes. In August 2009, Ai Weiwei traveled to Chengdu to testify in the trial of a fellow investigator, Tan Zorin, who had been charged with inciting subversion. And while he was there, trying to perform this civic duty, he was beaten by the police.
The consequence was nearly fatal.
A month later, in September 2009, he's in Munich, Germany, preparing for a major exhibition. And he collapses.
Rushed to the hospital.
Emergency brain surgery for a cerebral hemorrhage. And the doctors definitively linked it to the police beating in Chengdu.
When you think about it, he was literally putting his body on the line, risking his life just to publish the names of dead children.
And the attacks weren't just physical, they were coordinated. The Financial Times reported that 2 of his accounts were targeted in a highly sophisticated state-sponsored hack.
Operation Aurora.
That's the one, linked to attempts to force him to leave the country. And at the exact same time, state security agents started aggressively investigating his bank accounts for unspecified suspected crimes.
So the message from the state was a 3-pronged assault: physical violence, digital espionage, and financial suppression.
They wanted him silenced, exiled, or broke. And their failure to do that led directly into the next phase: full-blown state aggression designed to physically destroy his life and his work.
And that starts around 2010.
Yes. This is where we get into the Shanghai studio controversy, and the initial premise is just so cynical.
The government, specifically the Jiading district in Shanghai, actually invited him to build a studio there in 2008. It was part of this cultural development push.
Right. And he completed this striking large studio in August 2010. But the irony is just palpable.
As soon as the building was done and his political critique was at a fever pitch, the terms suddenly changed.
Only 2 months later, October 2010, the Shanghai government declares the brand new studio an illegal construction and slates it for immediate demolition.
And Ai Weiwei publicly called this out as biased retaliation, saying he was the only one singled out to have my studio destroyed. He directly linked it to officials being upset by his documentaries.
So his response was immediate defiance. He planned a party to mark the planned demolition. He wanted to turn the site of his own destruction into a point of celebration and protest.
But the state moved to preempt him. In November 2010, he's placed under house arrest to physically stop him from attending his own party.
But this act of suppression led to one of his most legendary acts of public defiance, the River Crab Feast.
This is the genius of his political performance art.
It really is. Despite his house arrest, over 1,000 netizens still showed up for the party. And they consumed river crab, or hizi.
Which is this brilliant, widely understood euphemism in Chinese used to mock official censorship and the government's constant demand for social harmony.
So the feast itself became an artistic protest against being silenced.
It turned a local bureaucratic demolition into a global story about cultural defiance.
But the government still needed to assert its power. On January 11, 2011, the studio was forcibly demolished in a surprise move without any prior notice.
A complete physical erasure of the structure.
It was the government's way of saying, we can build you up, but we can also instantly and violently tear you down.
And this cycle of escalating confrontation just culminates 3 months later in the most defining moment of his career.
The 2011 arrest and detention.
April 3rd, 2011. He's arrested at Beijing Capital International Airport trying to fly to Hong Kong.
Security agents search his studio. They seize everything, laptops, data, and they detain 8 of his staff members and his wife, Ai Qing, for short periods.
The official reason was, as you'd expect, economic. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs claimed he was being investigated for economic crimes, specifically tax evasion.
But the reality, according to his global supporters, was pure political retaliation. This arrest happened right in the middle of this online call for Middle East-style political protests in China.
The Jasmine Revolution.
Right. And the sources reveal that just days before his arrest, AI had tweeted about this specific reference to jasmine. He noted how people who were scared of it were sending out information about how harmful it was.
Which led him to realize that jasmine is what scares them the most.
He recognized the power of their idea right before they snatched him.
And the global response was immediate and really unprecedented. It showed just how effective his international platform had become.
The U.S. government, the EU, major human rights groups, art institutions worldwide, they all protested his detention.
Tate Modern in London, which was hosting his massive sunflower seeds installation at the time, made this very definitive public statement. They put a huge sign on the outside of the museum that just read, "Release Ai Weiwei."
A group of European intellectuals, led by Václav Havel, the former Czech president, published an open letter to the Chinese premier condemning the arrest. Petitions demanding his release got over 90,000 signatures.
Meanwhile, the Chinese state countered with a massive character assassination campaign through its media.
And they didn't just stick to tax fraud. State media launched this comprehensive smear effort. They described him as a deviant and a plagiarist.
The pro-Beijing newspaper Wenwei Po accused him of tax evasion, bigamy, and spreading indecent images.
Now, this is a critical point we have to analyze impartially. The state was not just pursuing him legally. They were actively trying to destroy his social reputation and his artistic credibility.
Right. While his supporters dismissed all this as a politically motivated character attack, the sources clearly show the state was leveraging every tool it had, legal, social, cultural, to just delegitimize his critique.
And after 81 days of detention, the details of his confinement provide the most chilling insight into the state's calculated methods.
After his release, his sister revealed the conditions. He was kept in a tiny room with constant, unceasing artificial light. He was watched, monitored 24/7 by 2 guards, never alone for a single moment.
It was a deliberate form of psychological torture. It wasn't designed to harm him physically, but to break him mentally. Highly personalized detention.
And what stands out most is Ai Weiwei's own reflection on this experience. He said, "In jail, there are certain conditions where you wish to die rather than to stay alive. Basically, you use life to punish life."
You use life to punish life. That powerful description just gave you a clear window into the calculated dehumanization process he endured.
He was released on bail on June 22, 2011.
And state media claimed it was due to his good attitude in confessing his crimes and his willingness to pay back taxes.
But the sources also cite a counterpoint. A professor from the China University of Political Science and Law suggested the release on bail was actually a sign that the government didn't have solid evidence to support the economic crime charges.
Right, so they released him to avoid a prolonged, embarrassing legal battle. He was, however, prohibited from leaving Beijing for 1 year.
Which immediately led into the next and longest phase of the conflict. Part 4, the tax case. This became a long, grinding legal and financial suppression effort.
Designed to break his resolve through sheer bureaucracy.
The Beijing Local Taxation Bureau moved swiftly, demanding a massive sum, over 12 million yuan. That's about 1.85 million US dollars.
In unpaid taxes and fines from his company, Beijing Fakey Cultural Development Ltd. And it's important to remember, this company was technically registered in his wife's name, Ai Qing.
So the state was using legal mechanisms to try and bankrupt his family and his organization.
But the global response to this financial threat turned that fine into a spectacular crowdsourced counter-performance.
An online loan campaign was started globally in November 2011 to raise the funds needed for the appeal collateral. The scale and the speed of the response were phenomenal.
Within just 10 days, nearly 9 million RMB, that's close to $1.4 million, was collected from over 30,000 individual contributors around the world.
This wasn't just fundraising. It was like a digital referendum on his innocence and the state's overreach.
And the symbolism in the donations is incredibly poignant. Contributors would often send funds in very specific symbolic amounts that referenced major political tragedies.
It's like 8,964.
And referencing June 4th, 1989, the date of the Tiananmen massacre, or 5/12 for May 12, 2008, the date of the Sichuan earthquake.
The donations were acts of collective memory. They transformed this bureaucratic tax appeal into a memorial for state crimes.
And Ai Weiwei underscored this by insisting the funds were loans, not donations. He issued personalized loan receipts to every single participant, acknowledging the funds were just collateral for his appeal.
He effectively turned 30,000 global citizens into co-conspirators in his legal defense. The whole suppression effort just backfired spectacularly in terms of public relations.
But despite the public backing, the legal process remained entirely predictable. The court heard the appeal in June 2012, but AI himself was prohibited from even attending the hearing.
Which just highlights the predetermined nature of the outcome.
He had no illusions. He'd already said publicly he expected the court to protect the government's interest.
And his prediction proved accurate. The appeal was rejected in July 2012, the final fine upheld at about $2.4 million. He deposited the initial collateral but refused to pay the rest.
Right. He maintained he just didn't recognize the charge as legitimate.
So the state responded with bureaucratic strangulation. In October 2012, authorities revoked his company's license because it failed to complete its annual re-registration.
But the company couldn't re-register because, and this is crucial, the state security had confiscated all its corporate materials and official stamps during the 2011 arrest.
So it wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate, technical maneuver to make sure the company could no longer legally operate.
And you see this continuous, petty harassment, not just the big legal battles. It extends to institutional censorship within China, even years later. His name just became poisonous.
Right, like in 2014, at the 15 years of Chinese Contemporary Art Work Show in Shanghai, the pressure became really clear there.
His name was physically removed from the list of winners and jury members. And his major artworks, sunflower seeds, stools, they were physically taken off the exhibition floor.
The curator later confirmed that was a direct decision from the Shanghai Municipal Bureau of Culture.
And a similar thing happened at the Allen Center for Contemporary Art in Beijing, an exhibition honoring the late curator Hans van Dyck. AI contributed 3 artworks, but his name was conspicuously missing from the press release.
So AI and his assistants protested by just removing his 3 artworks from the show.
Which forced the issue publicly. The CEO of the center later admitted the omission was to avoid problems with authorities who had specifically threatened to arrest her if his name was included.
So it demonstrates this constant threat, forcing institutions to basically participate in his erasure just to protect themselves.
Okay, so let's move from the conflicts back to the creations. We have to spend some time on part 5, the major visual art and architectural pieces that really define his work.
He uses these physical objects as historical and political commentary.
And if we start with his early conceptual work, you have to look at dropping a Han Dynasty urn from 1995.
It's a piece of performance art documented in 3 large photos showing him holding, then dropping, and then watching this 2,000-year-old ceramic piece just shatter on the ground.
It's a violent, deliberate act of destruction against what most people would see as irreplaceable cultural heritage.
So why smash history to critique history?
It's a profound critique of heritage and value, specifically in a state that claims to protect ancient history while at the same time destroying its own recent political and cultural history, whether it's the Cultural Revolution or just rapid, uncritical modernization.
He's asking, where do we place real value? In a ceramic pot or in human dignity?
Exactly. And the source material gives us the powerful silent counterpoint to this.
Yeah.
Straight, created between 2008 and 2012. This is a monumental memorial to the Sichuan earthquake victims.
The scale and execution are just staggering. He collected 150 tons of twisted steel rebar that was recovered from those collapsed tofu-dreg schools.
And the destruction was visible in every single bent, mangled piece of steel.
And then his studio staff undertook this incredibly arduous, almost monastic task, meticulously straightening every single bar out, one by one, for years.
And that labor of restoration is central to the piece. The final installation displays these perfectly straightened bars lying side by side, like waves or seismic lines on the floor. It's an intensely powerful, silent memorial.
He took the physical evidence of corruption and tragedy and subjected it to this painstaking process of forced, ethical restoration.
Attempting to restore dignity and order where the state had only offered cover-up and chaos.
And then, of course, there's the piece that introduced his conceptual scale to the mass public, Sunflower Seeds, at the Tate Modern in 2010.
A masterclass in monumental conceptual art. It combines this immense scale with profound political meaning. It was 100 million individually handmade and hand-painted porcelain seeds spread across the vast turbine hall floor.
100 million seeds. The scope is just mind-boggling, and the critique has 2 layers, right? First, the political reference.
Yeah. During the Mao era, Mao was constantly shown in propaganda as the sun, and the masses of Chinese people were the seeds turning towards him. Ai Weiwei takes that image and completely subverts it.
So the sheer overwhelming mass of these tiny, individually crafted seeds symbolizes the latent collective power of the Chinese people.
He's suggesting that this overwhelming population, when united, is strong enough to stand up to and potentially overthrow the CCP.
And the second layer is the economic critique, the challenge to the whole made in China mantra.
Precisely. To create 100 million seemingly identical items, he deliberately used traditional, labor-intensive methods. The sources say it required 1,600 artisans in Jingdezhen working for 2.5 years.
So this monumental effort memorializes the intense, often invisible human labor that's usually hidden behind mass industrialized products stamped "Made in China."
It's forcing you, the viewer, to confront the human cost of that scale.
And his work also directly addresses the persecution he endured, like the sculpture surveillance camera from 2010.
A marble sculpture made in direct response to the government installing surveillance and listening devices in and around his Beijing studio as a specific form of political punishment.
So by taking this modern symbol of state control, the video camera, and rendering it in classical, enduring marble, he's elevating the issue.
He's saying, this oppression isn't temporary. It's a permanent, classical feature of this regime.
Similarly, the Hisa crab sculptures from 2010.
Directly referencing the river crab wordplay we talked about, the euphemism for censorship. Sculpting the crabs in porcelain turns the political mockery right back on the government that tried to silence him.
Then there's Trace, the massive floor installation from 2014. It was made up of 176 portraits composed entirely of Lego bricks.
And the location was so deliberate, so powerful. It was originally installed inside the notorious Alcatraz prison in San Francisco.
Yep.
The 176 portraits depicted political prisoners and prisoners of conscience from all over the
The
world.
contrast is key there.
It is. He's using Lego, a child's toy, a symbol of playful construction and innocence, to depict figures enduring serious persecution, often held in isolation, in a place synonymous with extreme confinement.
After Alcatraz, it moved to the Hirshhorn Museum in D.C., and the installation didn't just stop at viewing, it encouraged civic action.
Yes, the exhibition allowed visitors to write postcards that were then sent to the political prisoners depicted in the work. He seamlessly transformed artistic viewing into direct, tangible civic action. That's a hallmark of his best work.
And while his activism really drives the narrative, we can't forget his architectural practice beyond the bird's nest.
No, he curated the Jinhua Architecture Park in 2002, and there are projects like the Psy Residence in upstate New York, designed with HHF architects. The sources noted its extraordinarily refined details.
He also curated the ambitious Ordos 100 project, bringing together 100 architects from 29 countries to design villas in Inner Mongolia.
And although that project remains unrealized, the documentary he made about it chronicles this massive global collaboration. His architectural work just underscores that he's not simply an anti-government figure. He is a designer who insists that design must have integrity.
And when that integrity is compromised by political messaging, he rejects it.
Exactly. And that distinction integrity over ideology becomes the central focus of Part 6, which really starts after he finally gets his passport back in 2015. This marks his decisive shift from focusing primarily on Chinese dissent to global human rights concerns.
And his extensive filmography is arguably the most crucial medium for this global shift. The films often serve as direct reporting.
And they frequently put him or his team in direct conflict with local authorities all over the world.
We mentioned Descobing the Peace earlier from 2009, which documents the specific incident where he was beaten by police while trying to testify for the Sichuan investigator.
It's a literal cinematic record of his own persecution.
Then there's A Beautiful Life, also from 2009, which details the remarkable story of Feng Zhengyu,
the Chinese citizen who lived in the passageway of Narita Airport outside Tokyo for 92 days in protest because Chinese police kept preventing him from returning home.
And AI interviewed him 3 times right there at the airport.
Another powerful example is Ping and Ai Qing from 2011, which investigates the suspicious death of a village leader named Ai Weiwei, who was fighting the local government over confiscated land. The film crew documented being followed and obstructed by local authorities.
And he even chronicled his own ordeal in the 2014 film Ai Weiwei's Appeal. It reconstructs the events from his 2011 arrest through the final tax appeal ruling.
After leaving China in 2015, his gaze shifted squarely onto the global refugee crisis.
He committed intensely to documenting this massive movement of displaced people,
which resulted in the feature documentary Human Flow in 2017, a global effort that included filming in the Gaza Strip. It's this expansive humanistic look at the crisis, drawing heavily on his own personal experience of exile and statelessness.
And he translated that crisis into monumental physical installations using his signature style. Law of the Journey from 2017 featured an all-black, 230-foot-long inflatable boat carrying 258 faceless refugee figures.
That was the culmination of his visits to 40 refugee camps during 2016. The scale of the boat, made of the same material as the real dinghies, combined with those faceless figures. It transforms the ephemeral, dangerous journey into this sober, monumental memorial.
We also see his very visible public art-making statements, like his 2016 use of 14,000 discarded orange life jackets from Lesbos, Greece.
Right. He used those life jackets, cast aside by people desperate for safety to cover the columns of the Konzerthaus in Berlin.
It's highly effective. It instantly transforms this stately, established European concert hall into an unexpected monument to displaced humanity. It forces the comfortable audience to confront the human cost of the crisis right on their doorstep.
And the sources show that even living in Europe, away from the direct threat of the Chinese state, his critical stances continue to generate controversy and confrontation, even with Western institutions.
Like his longtime advocacy for the release of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange.
He sees Assange's situation as a litmus test for press freedom globally. He co-signed a letter condemning the UK and Swedish governments over Assange's detention, and he held a silent protest outside Old Bailey during his extradition hearing in 2020.
And this stance led to conflict with Western cultural institutions, which is where things get really interesting. In 2021, an artwork supporting Assange, which incorporated a photo of Assange's embassy running machine, was rejected by British curators.
The curators claimed it didn't fit the exhibition concept.
Yeah.
But Ai Weiwei publicly interpreted this as institutions refusing to touch on a topic like Assange, suggesting a kind of Western self-censorship around challenging powerful state interests.
The most recent controversy detailed in the source material revolves around his comments on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in 2023. AI has historically been a supporter of Palestinian causes.
And his exhibition at the Listen Gallery in London was postponed indefinitely after he posted a tweet about the conflict. The tweet stated, "The sense of guilt around the persecution of the Jewish people has been at times transferred to offset the Arab world. Financially, culturally, and in terms of media influence, the Jewish community has had a significant presence in the United States.
We have to be very strict in our reporting here. The sources document the comment, and they document the gallery's subsequent decision to postpone the exhibition, citing concerns over the timing and the potential impact of his statement.
Ai Weiwei also publicly criticized the suspension of NYU professors over comments regarding Israel, likening it to a cultural revolution. The postponement of his show in London just demonstrates that challenging powerful, established views, whether it's the CCP or global political narratives, still carries significant artistic and professional costs, no matter where he lives.
And geographically, he's been mobile. He moved to Berlin in 2015, but then left, controversially stating that Germany is not an open culture.
He later moved to Cambridge and currently resides in Portugal, though he still keeps bases in Berlin and Cambridge. His entire life, even in relative safety, appears to be an ongoing search for a culture that's truly capable of handling open dissent.
So let's synthesize everything we've discussed. We've covered decades of profound, disruptive work and continuous conflict. What are the key takeaways from this massive body of source material?
I think the first is that Ai Weiwei's identity is wholly defined by the fight against authoritarianism in all its forms. He's an artist of conceptual and monumental scale, but his primary medium is his own dissent, his willingness to document corruption and human rights abuses, from the Sichuan earthquake to the global refugee crisis.
He transformed persecution into production. The state beat him, he made a film about it. The state demolished his studio, netizens turned it into a massive protest feast.
The state demanded a massive fine, and 30,000 citizens crowdfunded his defense with politically symbolic loans.
And this commitment has earned him immense international recognition, often in direct proportion to the severity of the Chinese government's attacks. He was named Art Review's #1 in their Power 100 list in 2011, the same year he was arrested.
And the Chinese Foreign Ministry publicly criticized that selection, saying the choice was purely based on political bias.
That same year, he was a runner-up for Times Person of the Year, and he later received the inaugural Václav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent. He is a living testament to the fact that art in the hands of a determined individual can be one of the most powerful forms of political accountability.
But this huge public platform stems directly from profound personal suffering. We keep coming back to those 81 days of detention and his reflection on that psychological torment.
He processed that isolation by creating the sculpture man in a cube, a concrete block containing a single figure in solitude, the likeness of myself. He believed everything in jail was against the essential meaning of being alive.
So we'll leave you with this final, provocative thought based on the entire scope of the material we've explored today. Ai Weiwei has successfully transformed his deeply politically inflicted personal suffering, being that man in a cube, into a universal platform for global advocacy, from Chinese dissidents to Syrian refugees.
So the question is, how does that experience of isolation and profound individual suffering both inform and potentially limit his ability to speak credibly and effectively about collective human suffering on a global stage? Can the personal wound ever truly encompass the universal tragedy, or does it always remain a highly effective yet singular perspective? It's the challenge of transforming intimate trauma into a universally effective political voice.
A challenge he continues to tackle daily, wherever he may be.
Food for thought indeed. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We'll see you next time.